Hi everyone, this video is part 6 of the development series for AP Psychology students. This particular video focuses on self-development. This is the final video in the series on development. This particular video will finish the concepts from the section titled 3.4, Social Emotional Development Across the Lifespan. These are the key focus questions for today's video. By the end, you should be able to answer each one of them. These are the vocabulary concepts you should take note of while watching today's video. By the end, you should be able to define and describe them. Now, I want to start with the terms self-concept and self-esteem. These terms aren't directly mentioned in Unit 3 of the CED, but they will come up in Unit 4, and I think they're important to bring up here because they relate to how we develop our sense of self. At around 6 months of age, infants show early signs of self-awareness as they begin to reach out. They'll notice their image in the mirror, and they might treat it like another child. At the ages of 15 to 18 months, infants will begin to recognize the image in the mirror as themselves. They'll notice if there is a spot on their face and they see it in the mirror, they'll understand that it's on their own face. By the ages of 3 to 5 in early childhood, this is where they're going to start to develop early signs of self concept, which is how you view yourself. Children's self concept begins to develop in this time period. They're going to start recognizing their gender, they're going to recognize their membership in groups, and they're going to compare themselves to others. In middle childhood, between the ages of 8 and 9, children's self image becomes more stable and they are going to be able to recognize their strengths and their weaknesses, and they're going to form an idea of the traits that they want to have. By the age of 12, children have a full self concept, which includes a more complex understanding of who they are, including their psychological traits and their roles in different groups. Throughout childhood, children develop self esteem, which is how they feel about themselves, which influences their confidence and their independence and their social interactions. A positive self concept leads to increased confidence and sociability. So, just to define these concepts one more time, self concept refers to the way you understand yourself, like your values and your roles and your beliefs. It's your mental picture of yourself, whereas self-esteem is the emotional aspect of your self-image. It's how you feel about yourself, and it involves the value you place on yourself and how you feel confident and worthy and the positive feelings about who you are. Erikson was a German American psychologist best known for his theory on psychosocial development, which focuses on individuals and how they navigate key challenges and conflicts at different stages of their life, and it shapes their identity and personal growth. Erikson's psychosocial development outlines 8 stages of human development that are each characterized by a key conflict that shapes the individual's sense of self, and it influences their emotional and social growth throughout life. Erikson believed that at each stage of life, individuals face this conflict or crisis that must be resolved to develop a healthy sense of self. Successfully resolving these conflicts leads to a positive outcome like trust and independence or competence, while failure to resolve these conflicts can result in negative outcomes like confusion or insecurity. These crises, according to Erikson, are crucial in shaping a person's emotional and social development, and it influences how they interact with others and perceive themselves. Each stage builds on the previous one, shaping the individual's sense of self throughout their life. I find that Erikson's stages are difficult for students to remember due to the number, because there are 8 stages, and also the length of their titles, because each name is named after the 2 potential outcomes, one positive and one negative, that come from each crisis. So let's start with the first stage. And as I mentioned, every stage will have a title that is named after the 2 outcomes, one positive and one negative, that can result from the crisis at that stage. So in stage 1, this is called trust versus mistrust, or trust and mistrust. This happens in infancy between the ages of birth and 18 months. And the conflict or the crisis centers on whether the child learns to trust their caregivers to meet their basic needs, or if they feel uncertain and fearful about whether they can rely on their caregivers. An example would be an infant who relies on their caregiver for food and comfort and care. And if that caregiver is responsive, then the child is going to learn to trust that their needs can be met. Now, the positive outcome is that the child is going to feel a sense of trust and safety in the world. And the negative outcome would be if those caregivers are neglectful and inconsistent, the child might develop a sense of mistrust and fear and anxiety. And a secure attachment in infancy is going to lay the groundwork for healthy relationships and security later in life. The next stage happens between the ages of about 2 to 3 years old, and it is called autonomy and shame and doubt. The conflict is versus whether the child is feeling a sense of independence or whether they are shamed for trying to be independent. Autonomy means your ability to make your own choices, to do things by yourself. And this conflict involves whether the child develops this sense of independence or feels shamed about their abilities to perform a task on their own. So, an example might be if a toddler tries to assert their independence, like dressing themselves or using the toilet, and whether they feel that they are able and capable of doing that. If a caregiver supports the child's efforts, they're going to gain a sense of confidence and autonomy. But if the caregivers are overly critical and discourage their independence, the child may feel shamed and doubt their abilities. The next stage happens between the ages of 3 and 5 years old, and this is about a preschool aged child. And this conflict is called initiative and guilt. Initiative is the desire and ability to start and do things on your own without being told to. And the conflict arises when the children explore their abilities and they take initiative in activities and decisions, and whether they then feel guilty about their actions as being wrong or undesirable. So a child might take initiative to plan an activity. They might ask lots of questions and inquire about things. And if a child is encouraged in their taking of initiative and their leadership skills, they're going to have a more positive outcome. If they're criticized or discouraged when they ask lots of questions or they try new things, they might develop guilt and they might hesitate to try new things. The next stage is called industry versus inferiority, and this happens between the ages of 6 and 12 years old. So this is a school aged child. And industry is referring to a sense of being good at doing a task or working hard and achieving things. Inferiority is the feeling of not being capable or able to do tasks. And this conflict revolves around whether a child develops a sense of competence and accomplishment for tasks, or whether they feel inferior and inadequate compared to their peers. So, an example might be if a child is beginning to engage in schoolwork and social activities, such as playing sports and doing academics. A positive outcome would be that they are having success in school and they're having peer relationships that boost a sense of competence and industry. A failure would be that maybe they are getting negative feedback at school, or getting negative feedback about their abilities. And this can lead to a negative outcome or feeling inferior. The next stage in Erikson's psychosocial stages is called identity versus role confusion, or identity and role confusion. This happens between the ages of 12 and 18 years old, and the conflict focuses on whether an adolescent successfully forms stable personal identities or is able to establish a sense of who they are, or if they experience confusion about their role in life and who they are. So, as a teenager is exploring different roles and beliefs and career paths to establish their identity, they might have a successful or positive outcome where they're exploring and they lead to a strong sense of identity, or they might have a negative outcome where they're confused about who they are. If a teenager fails to explore or fails to commit to a role or a belief about themselves, they might experience confusion about their identity. The next stage is called intimacy versus isolation. And this happens in young adulthood, and this is described to be happening between the ages of 18 years old to 40 years old. And this conflict concerns whether the adult is able to form meaningful relationships or struggles with loneliness and isolation due to the fear of intimacy. An example might be an adult who forms deep committed relationships like romantic partners or close relationships. And that would be the positive outcome, that the adult is forming intimate relationships, fostering emotional connections and companionship and trust. But the negative outcome in this particular conflict would be failing to form close relationships that can lead to isolation and loneliness. The next stage is generativity versus stagnation, or generativity and stagnation. This is happening in the middle adult years from the age of about 40 to 65 years old. Generativity refers to the desire to help others and contribute to society and make something meaningful out of your life. And stagnation is the feeling of being stuck and not having a sense of purpose. And this conflict involves whether the adult feels a sense of productivity and contribution to society, or if they experience stagnation and a lack of purpose. So, an adult might enter this stage and wonder if they're contributing to society, whether it's through their work or raising children or through community involvement. And a positive outcome would be that they feel that their work is meaningful and they're fostering a sense of productivity and contribution to society. A negative outcome would be that they feel that they haven't achieved a sense of purpose, that they feel unfulfilled or disconnected from society and stagnating. The last stage is called integrity versus despair, or integrity and despair. And this happens in late adulthood, ages 65 and beyond. And this conflict involves something called integrity, which is a feeling of satisfaction or pride with the life that you lived, or a feeling of despair. So, this conflict centers on whether an older adult is reflecting on their life and they feel a sense of fulfillment and integrity, or they feel a sense of regret and despair, like they've missed opportunities or they have unfulfilled goals. So, an example would be an elderly adult who is reflecting on their life and considering whether they lived a meaningful life or not. A positive outcome would be that the person feels satisfied with their life experiences. A negative result would be that a person regrets or is dissatisfied with their life. And these are the 8 stages of Erikson psychosocial development. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I have found that these are really challenging for students to remember. And so, one tip that I give students is to try to just remember the positive outcomes. I think that students can often remember them by those positive outcomes if you remember them that way, like initiative or identity or integrity. And if you can remember that, then you can usually remember what the opposite is of that particular crisis. And that's my tip for you. Remember that first successful outcome, and I think that will help you think about the crises in a different way. So, James Marcia's work on identity development builds on Erikson's theory. Particularly, he focuses on adolescent development and the development of identities. And Erikson proposed that adolescence is a critical period for forming identity, but Marcia felt that there was more detail needed in understanding how individuals develop their identity and how it's formed and how they commit to an identity. And he started his research in the 1960s, developing his identity status theory to explore how adolescents experience identity development. And he argued that adolescence is not just a time of role confusion, but a period where people are actively exploring and making decisions about who they are. And those decisions play a key role in shaping their identity. He has 4 identity statuses that offer a more nuanced approach than Erikson's idea, and that adolescents are exploring and making commitments and changing and finding out who they are through 4 different statuses. So, the first status is called identity diffusion. And this status refers to individuals who have not yet explored or committed to an identity. They might feel uncertain or indifferent about their future and who they are. And an example might be an adolescent who feels lost and doesn't seem to have a clear direction in their life. They haven't explored career options. They might not feel certain about their religious beliefs or have really identified their personal values, and they might not really care about finding the answers. They might be unsure about what they want in the future and might feel directionless. The next identity status is called identity foreclosure, and people in this status have made a commitment to an identity, but they did so without exploring other options. It's more of a premature commitment without exploring alternatives. They might have just taken an identity like, I'm a jock, because all they really know is sports. Or they might adopt the same career path or values and beliefs as their parents and have a strong sense of identity, but not have explored any other ideas or alternatives. So a teenager might follow in their family's tradition of becoming a doctor because that's what's expected without questioning or considering other possibilities. And this would be called identity diffusion. Identity moratorium is when an individual is actively exploring different identities, but has not yet made a commitment. They're in a period of exploration that's trying out different ideas and roles. An example would be if a high school student is exploring different career paths, questioning their beliefs, and trying out new roles, such as volunteering, exploring different college majors, or questioning their religious views. They haven't made any final decisions yet, but are in a state of active exploration. Identity achievement refers to a status when an individual has explored different options and has made a conscious commitment to their identity. They have a clear sense of who they are and what they value. Identity achievement in a young adult might look like a teenager who has explored different career options, values, and beliefs, and has made a conscious decision about the career they want, the religion they believe in, and other important aspects of their life. And they might have spent time trying to try different things out, reading, understanding, and questioning to come to the decision and the identity that they've chosen. And this would be identity achievement. There are many different aspects of identity, and we are typically beginning the process of asking, who am I in the adolescent years? Although these things can evolve and become more or less important in our lives as we age. Um, as adolescents are trying to understand their roles and their beliefs and their behavior, they're going to be questioning their place in society. And this is a period of self reflection that's influenced by the society that they're in, their family, and their peers. And if they haven't already, they're likely going to reflect on their racial and ethnic identity and how that influences their experience in society. Adolescents might begin to take pride in their cultural traditions and their shared history, and they might even begin to take a greater interest in their own heritage and family experiences. It's also common for individuals in adolescent years to lean into or to question the gender roles that society has given them. They may confirm and want to express what they already believe about gender identity, or they might question it. Adolescents are also becoming more aware of their emotional and sexual interests and learning about their own attractions. Teenagers are also going to have a lot of energy focused on understanding how they relate to others in a more personal way. As people enter adulthood, other aspects of their identity are going to be processed and take more importance in their life. One of those is occupational identity, and another is religious identity. And those are going to become often prominent in adulthood. Young adults begin to establish a clearer sense of their career goals, their values, and their aspirations. And they are also going to either confirm and solidify the values they grew up with, or they might reassess their religious beliefs as they gain independence from their family. By early adulthood, most individuals have developed a clearer sense of their familial identity, like their role as a parent, an aunt, a sibling, a partner. And as their responsibilities in life grow, adults are going to further integrate that familial identity into a part of who they see themselves as. In the early 2000s, psychologist Jeffrey Arnett introduced a new stage of social development, and he called this emerging adulthood because he noticed, particularly in Western societies, individuals weren't moving straight from adolescence into adulthood, but rather there was more of a transitional period where the adolescents were not yet adults. They were not moving into this independent period where they were starting their own families, but rather there was an intermediate period. And he called this emerging adulthood. Many adolescents in Western societies were extending their schooling, going to college or trade schools with delayed entry into the workforce. And this often made it harder for young people to be economically independent. So, in this stage, there's been a greater emphasis on personal exploration before settling into traditional adult roles like marriage and parenthood. This period typically spans from the ages of 18 years old to 25 years old. And you can see in the timeline on the screen that there is a difference in the years 1890 and 2006 in the time between menarche and marriage. And this time has grown significantly. And this shows the need for a new stage in between adolescence and adulthood, which is now called emerging adulthood, because in most cases, adolescence doesn't immediately lead into adulthood. Another key theme in understanding social development during adulthood is how individuals navigate expected transitions. One concept that explains the culturally expected events and transitions is called the social clock. The social clock refers to the culturally preferred timelines of social events, such as when major life events should occur, like getting a job, getting married, having children, buying a house, reaching career milestones. And in many Western societies, people are expected by their parents, families, and societies to follow these transitional time markers. And one of those is marriage, which is often expected to happen between the 20s or early 30s. And a person might feel pressured to conform to this timeline. And many people who feel this pressure experience social anxiety if they are single at the age of 35 because they have fallen behind the expected social clock. This social clock can affect how adults see themselves and their place in society. So, to quickly summarize the main points, emerging adulthood is a relatively new stage that happens between the ages of 18 and 25 years old, where young people are not yet independent adults. The social clock refers to this societal timeline in culture where major life events are expected to happen. And finally, adult relationships, including family or close relationships, provide mutual support and care in adulthood. And these connections are usually influenced by our attachment styles from when we were children. Research shows that those secure attachments from childhood tend to lead to healthier, more stable adult relationships that are marked by trust and emotional closeness. In contrast, individuals who have insecure attachments as children face challenges building strong connections when they are in adulthood. And studies have found that childhood attachment influences the quality of adult relationships, such as romantic partners, where securely attached individuals are more able to form healthy, supportive bonds. So this leads us to the end of today's video. Let's do a few short questions for review. Remember, I'll read the question out loud and you'll need to pause the video to determine the answer. Question number 1 says, in some prosperous Western societies, it's common for adolescents to graduate from high school, go to college, and still live at home with their parents. They have not yet assumed full adult responsibilities and independence. Psychologists have identified this period of time as. Question number 2 says, EK is an adolescent. According to Erikson, her primary developmental task is to develop a sense of. This concludes today's video on self-development. On the left-hand side of the screen are the answers to the multiple choice review questions. And before closing out, be sure that you can answer our key focus questions and define our essential concepts.